I'm Lee Birchfield. I'm your library director, and it is my pleasure to welcome you tonight to what should be a fascinating conversation. We have two distinguished guests here tonight that we're going to get to eavesdrop on as they talk to us. And I get the pleasure of introducing them to you. I'll start with Mayor Greg Fisher. He's in his third term as mayor. And over the course of that time, he has demonstrated his commitment to building a city that is livable through a commitment to health equity, lifelong learning, great parks, a vibrant economy. And there has been no more steadfast supporter of libraries than he has been. And there's no greater sign of that than the recently completed and opened Northeast Regional Library, the third of our three regional libraries. So we're very happy to have Mayor Fisher here with us tonight. Our other guest, you've perhaps not met before. Farah Pandith is a world-leading expert and pioneer in countering violent extremism. She's an author and foreign policy strategist and has served under Presidents George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama. In 2009, she was appointed the first ever special representative to Muslim communities by then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. In her latest book, How We Win, How Cutting-Edge Entrepreneurs, Political Visionaries, Enlightened Business Leaders, and Social Media Mavens Can Defeat the Extremist Threat, Pandith explains how government, the private sector, and civil society can help Muslim youth solve their identity crisis and in turn build a safer, more stable world. Please welcome someone whose job I would not want, Farah Pandith.
Let's switch jobs. I'll take yours. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming out tonight. You're going to be hearing from one of the great American citizens here, and I would say a global luminary as well. I've had the pleasure of getting to know Farah over these last, not as much of it as a decade, but getting close to it. She's a regular attendee at the Muhammad Ali Humanitarian Awards. And then last year, was it last year? Yeah, February of last year, we went on this fascinating trip to India together with another United States mayor, Tom Tate. He and I were representing America's mayors on a trip to India to learn what they were doing to counter violent extremism. And then at the end of our trip, we visited His Holiness the Dalai Lama at his residence in Dharamshala, and then went on our ways after that. So it was a kind of yin and a yang. When you go to study countering violence extremism, then you end up with the Dalai Lama at the end of the trip. But as many of y'all know, the Dalai Lama has become a strategic partner of our city. I love saying it that way. You know, he is the Buddha of compassion, and of course, we've been an international model city of compassion for 4 years in a row. So we always have a lot to talk about when we get together. This discussion tonight is brought to you by the library, but then also an initiative called Lean Into Louisville. And Lean Into Louisville launched about 6 months or so ago. The roots of it were serendipitously, I'm not sure that's the right way to say it, but in the riots that took place in Charlottesville, the demonstrations when our country and the world saw the underbelly, the naked, evil underbelly of our country with white supremacists, Klan members marching in Charlottesville. And as I witnessed that, I don't know how you all felt when you were watching that on TV, but to me it was that kind of sick feeling in your stomach or the bile you get in your mouth and just saying, this cannot be the United States of America. But in fact, it is the United States of America where that type of activity is going on. So what can we do as a city then to respond to make sure that we're a city of compassion and inclusiveness? And so the idea of Lean Into Louisville came up with Kelly Watson over here. Kelly's our Chief Equity Officer, if you'd like to wave to the crowd. And Katie Dalinger, who's our Deputy Chief of Staff, and myself saying, you know, education, if we can educate people about discrimination, about prejudice, then frequently it goes away. And so Lean Into Louisville, you've seen other activities associated with that are all about educating folks about all forms of discrimination and prejudice and opening up our minds. to a way that we can have a more peaceful and better connected world. Farah brings an important message with us here tonight about extremism and countering violent extremism. So we'll be talking about that under all aspects. We see that in our country right now with white nationalism. You see various religions take hold of extremist positions, and then the political controversy starts swirling all around that. So we intend to have a far-reaching conversation here over the next 50 minutes or so. Let's start with something like fun. How'd you like spending time with the Dalai Lama last year?
One of the most incredible opportunities of my life, and I feel very grateful to be around his wisdom, but also around his energy. And as you know, he brings to you what you are able to receive. So if you're open to hearing what he has to say, it can mean many things. But what a gift to be able to meet him. What a gift to be able to go with you and with Mayor Tate and with Katie and others who together, I think, represent very different parts of America. And so to be able to take part of that and take part in that trip was a very special part of last year. And to be quite honest with you, it was one of the highlights of my life.
Nice. Well, it was great to share that with you. So you've had an incredible career in government, in the State Department, and you've still got a long way to go with your career as well. But you took an opportunity to stop and reflect and write this book to inform the world about something that you know a lot about and that you also feel like there's a pathway forward to go. So what brought you to extremism and countering violent extremism, CVE?
I wish that I would never have to do this in my life. I wish there wasn't a job that was required for someone to think about how to stop young people from joining groups like Al-Qaeda or the so-called Islamic State or white nationalists or what other kind of horrible extremists that we can think about. But I was really lucky. After college, I had an opportunity to come work in the government for the first time ever. I was right out of school, and I worked for the U.S. Agency for International Development, which is the arm of our government that gives economic and development aid, humanitarian assistance around the world, and had an incredible experience there in the H.W. Bush administration. And then I left and went back to graduate school. Now, serving your country is one of the most incredible, opportunities you can have. It's a gift, it's an honor, it's a privilege, in fact. But I never would have imagined, none of us did, that a 9/11 could have happened. And when 9/11 happened, I was in Boston, where I grew up, and I had, like all of us, a very visceral reaction to the idea that this terrorist organization had come to our land, had attacked us, and many nations, in fact, when the Twin Towers came down, many nations were attacked. It wasn't just us, but it was here on our soil. It was at the Pentagon. It was on the field in Pennsylvania. And I felt all those things, but I also felt something else. And I remember looking out. I was on the 41st floor of a building in Boston that overlooked Logan Airport. And as you will remember, some of the pilots left Logan Airport on one of the planes. And I remember looking out on that perfect September day and this feeling inside of me thinking, oh my gosh, I really hope this has nothing to do with Muslims. I hope this has nothing to do with Islam. And of course, we learned in the days afterwards that this terrorist organization called Al-Qaeda was claiming responsibility. But my reaction was, how dare they? How dare they try to define my country, America? And how dare they try to define my religion, Islam? And I walked into my boss's office and I told him that I loved what I was doing. I was really happy in Massachusetts. My family was in Massachusetts, but that I wanted to serve, that we had just been attacked and I didn't care how or what I did. I just needed to go back into government. And so I came back into the government because of 9/11, thinking I was only going to serve for a short period of time with no idea about what I'd be doing. But I went back to USAID because I had been there, and soon afterwards was asked to go to Afghanistan, where I was doing a project for a couple of months. When I came back, the National Security Council, Condi Rice was building up a new position at the National Security Council that was doing Muslim outreach. And they asked me to interview for it, and I I was lucky enough to go into government in that capacity. And I say this because those early experiences in what was happening right after 9/11, how we were responding to this attack, this horrifying thing that no one had predicted, nobody understood, we responded as we should. We protected ourselves. We built up a defense so that it couldn't happen again. We used what we would call kinetic power. We had military might out trying to go after Osama bin Laden. We built the Department of Homeland Security. We did all these things, right? But while I was at the National Security Council, we were beginning to think about, okay, now that we've done all this stuff, how are we thinking about protecting from the ideology that the bad guys were trying to use? And that's where I began to get involved in fighting extremism. It wasn't something I designed. It wasn't something that I had hoped ever to have this job. I was there at a very important time during the discussion, and I was very fortunate because the people that I was working with were really interested in out-of-the-box ideas and really understood the power of local communities. I mean, you cannot fight this ideological component from the top down. You have to do it from the bottom up. And it was really after, so we were having conversations within government around the ideology, but in fact, the National Security Council doesn't operationalize ideas. I mean, other parts of government do that. I was asked to leave the National Security Council and go to the State Department where we could operationalize some of the ideas that we were talking about in terms of bringing about a counter response to the ideology of the extremists that would work. And so that's where really I began to work on the issue of extremism. The reason why I wrote this book is part of it is a memoir. You're going to see me tell the story that I've just described. But I thought it was very, very important that Americans understood where the idea of fighting the ideological war came from, because there are lots of rumors all over this country about what countering violent extremism is. All kinds of groups that are in our nation that are spinning tales about where it began and what, it's a super secret spy program. It is a non-kinetic attempt to stop the ideology from preying upon young people, the ideology of us versus them. And so I talk about what was happening at the time when 9/11 happened, how we were talking about this, but importantly, I thought it was critical. In the Obama administration, I was asked to do a job that no one had had before, which was to engage with Muslims around the world. And I traveled to nearly 100 countries in that role, building the kinds of programs I know we'll talk about. But this book tells you what I saw around the world. It tells you, from my perspective, the trends that most people aren't hearing and talking about. It talks about the fact that young people, whether, and in this particular regard, the kind of extremists that I've been dealing with are those that are preyed upon by groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. So it's very focused on that, but there are lessons that can be used in other groups. But Mayor Fisher, the key part of this whole tale here is not to sort of put another book on the shelf. As much as I love books and I'm happy to be in a library, it was because I wanted to make sure that history was being recorded accurately. I did more than 35 interviews with former members of both the Obama and Bush administrations to talk about this. And I spent 3 years writing this book to make sure that every element of what was happening is preserved in the most rational and nonpartisan way I could, so that we can learn from our past and we can understand that this is not a hopeless situation. That in fact, fighting the ideology of us versus them is solvable. It is, you are never going to defeat the extremists. You're never going to have a globe where hate doesn't exist, as much as we would like that. But we can so decrease the appeal of that ideology that we can live in a very different kind of world.
And how do you see extremism and CVE efforts have changed? You served under 3 presidents, United States presidents, and over about 20 years probably now since you first started. So how has that arc changed, and what are the old dynamics and new dynamics, or is it all the same?
So I wish I could tell you, boy, we have deployed every possible insight that we've learned in a way that's magnificent. And we are rolling forward in a really terrific way. Unfortunately, nearly 20 years after 9/11, I'm hearing the same conversations we had in the days after 9/11. It's very depressing to say this to you, but it is the truth. There has been sophistication of a ramp up in terms of organization of the US government and other governments around the world. There are far more personnel that are working on this. It's something that we are actually doing as opposed to thinking about doing. So there are positive aspects to this. But 18 years after 9/11, we should have a machine going 24/7 that is so spectacular because we have so much research and we know what to do. There has been no willpower to actually get it done.
And so why do you think that is?
Well, there are two reasons primarily. One is you cannot, it's not only in the executive branch, but one component is what's happening with the executive branch. Who has the leadership to say, hard power and soft power are equal in my eyes, and I'm going to give as much effort and energy into both, and we're going to try to solve this thing. We have not seen that kind of response. We've heard presidents, all of them, say post 9/11, the ideology is important, fighting the ideology is important, but money has not matched the rhetoric. The organization of the US government has not matched it. So you have somebody who wakes up every single day and is in charge of every aspect of the military. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs could tell you exactly where every troop is, where every submarine is, where every satellite is. You know exactly what's going on, and God forbid we have to deploy our efforts. That person knows exactly what to do. In soft power, there's nobody that wakes up every day whose only job it is to understand how to stop the ideology. That is extraordinary, and it's important. Imagine a company that didn't have a person who was responsible for that every day. You just couldn't do it. So that's one part of the problem. The other part of the problem is Congress. And Congress has said, and has been very clear, that they're concerned about fighting extremists, but they have not put money where their mouth is. The only arm of the US government that is beginning to get some money for this has been the US Department of State or the Department of Homeland Security in any comfortable way. The solutions are real. It requires us to be able to give communities at a local level grants and effort and partnership. The government can be the convener and the facilitator and the intellectual partner with the ideas that we hear on the ground, but it's the local ideas that matter. We need to see Congress do what it is that they say that they want to do. So we have an executive branch problem and we have a legislative branch problem. Those are the two main reasons, but I'll give you a third. We are in a packed library today filled with Americans who care about the state of our world, not just our country, but our world and our city. Louisville is in this book. It's in this book because it talks about nano interventions. It talks about how one person can make a difference. The people of America have not demanded that our country gets serious about soft power. And I think that has been a critical obstacle in how we've thought about this. We've been really frightened about 9/11. We don't know enough. We keep thinking the terrorists are over there. We have one-off events that happen here. We forget about them. Look, I grew up in Boston, outside of Boston, a suburb. When the Boston Marathon happened, I mean, I felt it inside in a really weird, it took two people to do that event. Whether it's in El Paso, whether it is something that happens in Charlottesville, it is all the same us versus them ideology. I'd like to see the American public say, it is time for us to deploy everything we know about protecting young people. We know that most of the time, extremists prey upon those people who are under the age of 30. I think it is our responsibility to protect our youth. This is not a question of religion. This is not a question of race. This is not just a question of sexuality. This is a question of making sure that the us versus them ideologies are not thriving. And today in America, they are thriving. They are living in a real way. Americans an average person can do more than they have done. Together, when you ask what the problem is, it's all three parts that make a difference. I can't blame one thing or the other, but together they have brought us to a situation where we're 18 years after 9/11, and we're seeing a more serious situation domestically and internationally than we did when 9/11 happened.
So what is baffling to me sometimes as a mayor is that we've spent over $1 trillion
Yeah.
on some of these wars that we've fought, building a Department of Homeland Security. Domestically, we have about 100 people killed every day through gun violence.
Yep.
And of course, it's the massacres that get the headline, but the daily drumbeat of death in our cities is still there as well. So we've got a country that's capable of spending billions on this and billions on this and trillions on this, but we seem to struggle to get to that soft power to connect with that young individual that's off track, and then the bad guys get a hold of them. And so is it the same forces that you see like at work at America with populism, extreme populism and white nationalism that you would see, let's say, in radicalized Muslim youth?
The ideology of us versus them can be used in a lot of different formats, and whether it's a leader that uses that to gain political attention and support, or it's an extremist group that needs to recruit for their armies. The area that we have to focus on is stopping people from moving along that idea that they want to join that ideology, that they have a world that is black and white in terms of us versus them. What we have in America is actually quite profound. We have a lot of research that's been done since 9/11 about programs that we know can work online and offline to stop youth. We also have among the best globally on the medical science side, and social science side, of people who understand the adolescent and child brains. We have not included mental health and these social scientists into how we configure the solutions on the ground. When we are thinking about this, gun violence is a critical issue for America. It is an important issue that we discuss, and it is in fact related, obviously, to some of these events that we've seen domestically. But the idea of what's happening inside a child as they are growing up is what we haven't focused on, because it's too hard for government to think about that emotional thing. The one thing I discovered in my work traveling to nearly 100 countries around the world is all of these ideas that we had about why somebody gets radicalized were wrong. It has nothing to do with poverty. It has nothing to do with education levels. You know what it has to do with? It has to do with a crisis of identity that's happening to these young people. They want to belong. And that sense of belonging is something that we have studied and we know a lot about. Why are we not understanding that a human brain doesn't get mature until the age of 24? What can we be doing as society between 0 and 24 to make sure these kids have the resilience and are building the power within themselves to be able to push back against that us versus them ideology? What can we be doing to help them think about identity and belonging? What can we be doing as societies to actually build peer networks that allow those kids to have that kind of support? So the conversations that we're having about gun violence or about policing are important conversations, but they are not connected to this soft, gushy stuff. You talk about money. You know what Congress says to me? They ask me to prove if they give measly amounts of money for a program that, by the way, as I said, solutions that are at our fingertips. We have ideas that can be deployed and scaled. Small money, tiny money, not trillions of dollars. But when asked, can you prove to me that if we give you money for this program that that person will never get radicalized? How can you possibly, exactly, how can you possibly do that? But we're willing, and I want us to have the safest and best military in the world. Of course I do. I'm not going to say don't put money into making sure we have the best equipment and of course we must. But so too must we be able to experiment and take some risks and understand what we can do on the social cohesion side and on the identity and belonging side. Let's just take the so-called Islamic State that came to our consciousness in 2014. We went hard and fast once we realized it was a threat. We poured money into military, built coalitions globally. We spent a lot of money on the war against the so-called Islamic State. Do you know how much money we spent on soft power, just on stopping kids from joining the so-called Islamic State? 0.0138% of our effort. Now, how is that possible? I mean, you cannot get a resolution that is positive if that's the kind of attempt that you're trying. People tell me it's too hard. People tell me it's going to take hundreds of years. It is. We haven't even tried. I mean, I don't want to say government is business, but if we could just take this for a moment and put this in a business mentality, you're asking somebody to tell you a result and you haven't even trialed the product that you're trying to do. Let's go all in at scale for a couple of years and then tell me that you haven't seen a change in the community. Then tell me you haven't built the antibodies that are needed. Tell me that it's not working. There should be programs for young kids to fight hate at kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. In college, and in our regular society, in what you see and what you absorb. It isn't going to mean that there's never going to be hate. It's going to mean that there's going to be a larger consciousness and a larger attempt for us to think about how youth can think about their own identity. 9/11 for Muslim youth was a pivot point that is unprecedented in modern history. For these kids growing up, they have seen the word Islam or Muslim on the front pages of papers, online and offline, every single day for 18 years. And what's happened to them as they've grown up is that they are asking questions that their parents and grandparents didn't ask in the same way. And the solutions that are available to them are available at their fingertips with a swish of their finger on their phone. And so this new world that we're dealing with millennials and Generation Z, in an orchestrated manner with technology that is giving answers at a pace that we can't keep up with, we don't have enough in that system, this new system, to make sure that kids are moving away from that us versus them and are going toward things that we would want them to go toward. So I say the money, there has to be money, there has to be personnel, there has to be creativity. We all have that right now. We don't have the strategy, and we don't have the leadership to make this happen.
It's not a simple solution, right? So
Correct.
How can we embrace some of these things that are sophisticated? On the city level, I can tell you the parallel is people that just say, we need more police, we need more police, we need more police. More police does not by itself make a safe city, right? You have to have youth programs. The youth programs that we have, one program called Reimage, where we take kids that are justice involved with the courts before. They have a mentor, they get a degree, they get a job, 95% success rate. Okay, so that's all they need. Most of these young folks need somebody that loves them,
Yep.
gives a little bit of structure, a little bit of discipline, and expectations, and they do fine. But you can't prove what didn't happen.
Correct.
Right, and that's where some of these simplistic answers come from people that think they're making some type of point to you.
The localized answers are something that we know works, and we've tested these kind of local answers not just in America but all over the world in the years since 9/11. And what might happen, what might work in this part of Louisville may not work in another part of Louisville, but the people here understand this neighborhood and this community, and they have good ideas. We have got to give the opportunity to communities to come forward with ideas that they know will help build resilience. Yeah. And there's no, as you said, there's no silver bullet, there's no one size fits all. Identity is complicated. The many touch points a young person needs to have in their daily life to feel like they belong. This is not just about Muslim kids, it's obviously every kind of, us versus them that we're dealing with. I know that that's complicated, but I also know that we know that. And we know that a multi-layered, multi-touch point kind of community is what it is that can happen. Some of the things that I have learned in the work that I've been doing in this field is, ideas come from the most it's not the person who has the most experience all the time, or it's people who understand what's happening within that peer group. Oftentimes peers have ideas for their peers. We also know, and one thing that's off the chart, if I could do, one program, on steroids, we know that former extremists are the most credible voices imaginable. And they can speak to peers in a way that no one else can. Why we have not built out, and America, got to give credit where credit is due, the only network of former extremists anywhere in the world, the United States government, alongside with a couple of other nonprofit organizations and a foundation, put together. And it has about 300 or 400 former extremists. It should, at this point, 10,000 former extremists should be part of it. But taking their stories and putting them in front of kids who can see it in a way that makes sense is a really powerful tool. That's so easy. That's a low-hanging fruit, and we haven't done that. You know, so communities need to, I think, know about some things that are available. And I want to say a point about you began talking about the library and sort of history, right? And I think the way we teach, the words we use, how we think about the other, are soft, easy things that we may not think make a difference, but they really, really do. Lexicon matters. And I think that, so I'd love to see in America for us to have a different conversation about what we're not waiting. I'm not making a political statement because in fact it's not about that. It's about what you know you can do right this moment. And so whether you're a teacher, whether you're just a parent, whether you are a volunteer in a church, whatever it is that you're doing, how you're teaching kids to think about the language that they're using and how that corresponds to how they think about connecting with others really can make a difference.
Let's talk a little bit about the digital world.
Yes.
Major changes in online capabilities since 9/11. Certainly it existed then. You talk about some of the Muslim kids having the religion of me, how they learn about their religion, the fact that they might be even attracted to it in the first place. And then a lot of fear around the world right now, especially the business world, around the power of Facebook and Google and all of the data that they own, and supplanting a lot of businesses that use their data for their competitive advantages. I've never seen this kind of fear in business people before from a commercial aspect. But when you think about the role of internet and what data is available and how that can be used to corrupt or disrupt, what are the dynamics taking place there?
Obviously, the tech companies completely changed the game in the speed and the saturation for young people. Millennials, our generation that are digital natives. I mean, they are living through a different kind of reality than any of us can imagine. I also will tell you that parents also don't necessarily understand how algorithms work. So this is not just about the kids; it's about the parents that are giving the tools to their kids. It's taken a long time for us to uncover how the algorithms have been designed, how it feeds on a particular kind of thing, how within 72 hours of you Googling a particular thing, for example, all you're going to see, you're going to be locked into a system where that is all which is all you see, and you're around like-minded people. The chapter in my book is called Shake Google, because I was finding that young people, no matter where I went, when I asked them where they were getting answers to questions that they were asking about their identity, they were going to Google. And I'll give you an example, not one that I had personally, but one that you will remember. You remember the underwear bomber? Okay. This is a guy who grew up in an affluent family in Nigeria. And he was a young man, was studying in London, had a home there, in school there, he's doing well. He's in London. And he goes on Google and he asks Google, why doesn't my family eat halal meat? You know, halal, okay, it's like kosher, but okay. Now, he's asking Google this, okay? Why would Google, I mean, that's insane. Why doesn't he ask his mom and dad? Why doesn't he ask his brother, sister, auntie, uncle, cousin, somebody? What does Google spit back? Google spits back, well, your parents, your family's not religious enough. They're not Muslim enough. And that is the first time that he then goes to the next level. Well, how do I become more Muslim? And what can they? So he starts moving down a avenue, a tunnel online that gets him in front of people who are like, good, next recruit, how can I help you? Come over to me, I'm gonna tell you how to be the best Muslim that you can be. okay? And that's one teeny tiny example. I can talk about the girl in Seattle who went off to Syria because she got recruited online. How did they recruit her? Yes, by the way, women can get recruited, even though most people don't believe that. They can. Oh, your nail polish, I really like your nail polish. That's a really pretty color. Oh, what music do you listen to? Like any other predator would do. They start luring the girl in. Parents teach their kids how to protect them from sexual predators online. You do that immediately. You do it because you understand that there are bad guys online who will do nothing, who all day, every day are out there to pull your kids. Parents are not taught that there are extremist bad guys who are all day, every day trying to do the same thing. So the online space, many dimensions of this. One, the technology companies, while many of them at this point are saying that they are and to be fair, many have done much more than they did a few years ago. It is not just about takedown, as important as that is. I mean, Facebook, shame on them. The Christchurch horror that happened was online while he was doing it. It took them 17 minutes to take it down. I mean, it's awful. If you look at the statistics, it's awful. They have a big job in front of them. There's a lot of hate online. So, their response is it takes a long time, we don't have enough people, all of these kinds of things. They're big companies, they have a lot of money, they can figure this out. But their response has been slow, but it is coming. Some of these technology companies are also partnering with NGOs to help give those NGOs support on the systems that they're trying to deploy, how to build programs online so that when you're Googling, how can I be a better Muslim, or how do I go to Syria, something is going to come in front of you that is going to move you in a different direction than the direction of a dark pipeline. But the online space is not the only problem. It is the connection between the offline space and the online space. Something needs to be happening to you emotionally offline for you to do something emotionally online. You can't just suddenly become a new figure when you're on your cell phone. I would like to see technology companies put their money where their mouth is when it comes to dealing with extremism and really designing a better partnership with this issue of fighting extremism as opposed to an ad hoc kind of thing. I would also like us to think very carefully about what it is what we demand. You talked about people being scared about data. Data can be used for bad, or it could also be used for good, as you rightly said. Some of these technology companies and other companies, and this is where this second part, the title of my book, I don't only talk about technology companies, I talk about the private sector. When you live your life in the 21st century, you can't help but people gathering data on you. When you go to Whole Foods or Walmart, whether you're walking, people have all your data. They can slice and dice your demographic and your likes and interests. That cultural data can be used hand in glove with people who are trying to build programs to stop a young kid from doing something very bad. We've got to get to a place where we're using it for good and doing it in a better way. We're not doing that at pace. And I will say the final thing about the data piece is this: we have not yet imagined the worst. I mean, you think things are bad today. We aren't yet seeing the AI come forward in a way that is going to revolutionize the way people are absorbing information, and terrorists are using and deploying fake scenarios, fake events, and using AI to recruit. And I'm worried about this. And I'm worried about it because we haven't been able to do it even with the most simplistic problem that we had. It's now moving at a pace that is gaining traction. Extremist groups are learning from each other. Even though they might hate each other, the white nationalists are learning from ISIS's playbook because ISIS did it really well. Okay? Why wouldn't they? They want to win. So who's doing it really well? How did they use Twitter? How did they use Google? How did they use Facebook? Let's do the same stuff. Our messaging's different, but we're going to do it better. So on the technology side, they are able to monopolize the skill set. And it is going to be far more dangerous at a much faster pace than people recognize, and people will be not only getting radicalized at a younger rate, but the kinds of awful events that we are seeing will happen simultaneously. They will be broadcast, whether you want to see them or not. You will be, I mean, you can think of some really horrible things happening, and we have no defenses to be able to stop it the way we should all these years after 9/11.
Well, I mean, you raise a lot of interesting points there. So government is constrained by laws, right, in terms of who we're able to surveil. The for-profit businesses, through their artificial intelligence, can point us to this is a nexus of this type of hate, this is a nexus to this type of extremism. So the tools are out there, but what I'm hearing you saying is that the bad guys don't care what the rules are. And
but neither do we. So I'm going to push back on what the technology companies, their whole thing is, and everybody has, I mean, of course, as Americans, we believe in free speech. I mean, I understand all of this. But they already fixed the algorithms. If they did not, all you would be seeing all day long is pornography when you are on Google. Okay? That is the truth. I'm not just being funny. That is actually true. They already reduce certain things that you cannot search for because they're the N-word, for example. I mean, like, there are things that are already happening. We as a society need to decide what is real and what is not real in terms of what it is we're doing. They can say that they're not allowed to do this, but at the same time they're doing something else. Forget about the technology companies for a minute. Let's just think about somebody that wants to sell you a white t-shirt. Okay, you're a 16-year-old girl and they want to sell you a white t-shirt. Where are they getting all the data on what the cut of the white t-shirt, the length and all those kinds of things? They're getting it through a compilation of lots of cultural listening all over the world, are they not? We don't bat an eyelash on that. We're like, okay, it's Nike or it's Jeep Cherokee or it's Amazon, and they're gathering this information so they know how to sell you that car, how to sell you that white t-shirt, how to sell you that color of lipstick. It's all of this cultural data exists. We don't think about it, but it does actually impact your daily life. Why all of a sudden do we have a whole new set of standards when it comes to dealing with fighting hate? Explain that to me. Right? So I just want us to be real, and I want us to be honest about what really is going on. I want freedom of speech. I want us to be Americans, but I also want us not to be able to see the ability for extremists to surge. And I'll make one last point about the online space. We have watched a conversation happen in America over the last couple of years with all this horror that's been happening with all of these events, where people keep talking about domestic terrorism and international terrorism. Tell me something. Do ideas have borders? So I look at this issue, and I know our laws are written so that we are only allowed to do certain things overseas and we're only allowed to do certain things over here. In the 21st century, we've got to understand that the bleeding that has happened, the technology has changed the game, and that we are watching manifestos in one part of the world be used in another part of the world. We're seeing kids replicate events and stories because they've been inspired by something else, and we're learning. And now we know all this information. We're just still stuck with this idea that we're in the Cold War, and we're using the same set of tools from the Cold War as opposed to using 21st century tools for the world we're in today. In the kind of extremism that I have been working on, it is so important to raise a couple of statistics just so you have an idea. There are, as you know, 1/4 of the planet is Muslim. There are 1 billion Muslims under the age of 30. 1 billion. That is the demographic from which ISIS 2.0 and onward will be trying to recruit from. Now let's talk about the other kinds of extremists. The Taliban is no longer, people keep thinking that that's not a thing. It is a thing. Al-Qaeda and the Taliban are a thing. Boko Haram is a thing. Al-Shabaab is a thing. Those are some of the terrorist organizations. we're now seeing, in addition to all of that, all of these other kinds of extremist groups that people didn't think were still, going on. The rise of the neo-Nazis, the rise of the white supremacists, the rise of the identitarians in Europe, the rise of the, 18 years after 9/11, we have an increase of hate around the world, and we have no tools at pace, at scale, to fight them.
Yeah, well, that's my concern. The tools are there, right?
Of course.
The bad guys are
Yes.
using them.
Yes.
We are not. And so as we sort out the role of government and the role of privacy, we're losing this war. And so can governments move fast enough to fight an enemy like this?
It is. That's such a great question, and I'm going to say no. Government can't respond at the pace of the private sector. And I believe very strongly, I have an entire chapter in the book about all the things government needs to do, and there are many, okay? I have a lot of ideas. The solutions are there. If I had a magic wand, I could make all that happen. Great. But I also think the responsibility on the corporate sector is real and now. Let's look at the way millennials and Generation Z think about their power in the consumer generation. They are moving companies to a place where they didn't think that suddenly companies have to stand for something. What are your values as a company? It isn't just about diversity. It's not just about how many women are on your board. It's not about all these really important things. It's also about where are you investing? What are you doing? A young person will pay another $1 extra for their whatever it is that they're buying if they know it's sourced in a more ethical way. We know this. This is what the data is telling us. So I'm here saying to you, not only do companies have data that we can use, cultural data that can be helpful, but they also are symbolically important to stand for something bigger around the issues of hate. They've taken no company that I know of has gone all in by saying, you know what we stand for. They talk about diversity, they talk about inclusion, critical. But let's talk about how they can help on the effort of fighting us versus them ideology. And the supply chains, I'll make the business case for this. Boston lost billions of dollars when it shut down for 3 days after the Boston Marathon bombing, okay? Imagine in simultaneous time, a Boston, a El Paso, a couple of things happening in America the same, what will it do to the cities in terms of what those companies can do. So even if they are not interested in doing good, there is a bottom line condition that they need to think about, not just with their supply chains, but about what happens in their communities. So what am I saying here? I'm saying that companies, this is the time that American companies and global companies, I make that case globally as well, to get to use their corporate purpose component in a way that isn't only in the narrow fields that they've been thinking about, but it's about fighting hate. It is reducing the appeal of us versus them. No one likes to talk about this mushy-gushy stuff, Mayor Fisher. Everybody thinks it's too, in government, people's eyes would glaze over when I began to talk about the identity crisis. It's like, well, what are we going to do about Muslims with identity crisis? That's not our problem. Shouldn't Muslims be dealing with that? But what are you going to say to communities? Is it okay? Is it okay for us to have a world in which hate is on the rise? Is that all right? Is that the kind of world we want to live in? And if not, we all have to take part. Yes, governments have to take part, but so do companies, and so do the rest of us.
Right. When I say, the most powerful role that an elected official can play or a private individual is to shape culture.
Correct.
Okay, it's not this law or that law, but how do you create a culture around human values, kindness, compassion, love? That was our visit to the Dalai Lama. That's what we're trying to do in this city, and it is hard. A lot of people are like, give me a break.
Right.
That's so soft. You should be doing your job. Well, I would contend that creating these cultures that we're talking about, they will solve a lot of the world's problems. But when we're down here dealing with the smaller issues without the conditions in place that we're all interconnected as human beings, that's where we should be doing our work. We haven't talked about families so much, right? We've talked about government. We've talked about business. Are families breaking down all over the world? Not all over the world.
Well,
what's the role with that?
So I think family is, I'm so happy you talked about that. I want to talk about the role of the mother for a moment, because a mother is a child's first teacher in most families. And the way a family decides to be, like who they stand for and how they act with each other and with others, can make a remarkable difference in the way that child thinks about themselves. We know this, right? I mean, that's an obvious thing. But it's also what happens in the family in terms of how they think about those people who are different down the street or in their church or in their temple or in their, the language that they use about those other, that's where the kids learn these things. So family matters to how we are raising our children. What those kids are reading, what they're absorbing matters. I think an easy solution that everybody throws on the educational system is we need to do all these other things in schools. Kids spend most of their time in schools, but we as communities are not helping schools to give them what they need to help build these specific antibodies. And those things can begin at a family level. What books you read to your child before you put them to bed, how you think about the things that are happening in the world and how you talk about them can matter. I have heard, I've watched and experienced young people quote back to me things that they've seen on a television screen that send chills down my spine because they have absorbed something that I wish that they had never absorbed. It's happened in other parts of the world, but it's also happened here. I'll give you an example. I was in Cambodia. This is a story that's in the book. And I was outside of the capital city of Cambodia, and we were in the jungle, and I was visiting a very modest Muslim community. They had a mosque that was just very humble, and I was there with the translator sitting on the floor. We were talking. There were a bunch of mothers with their kids and some dads too, and a hand goes up, and a young person, somebody asked a question, and so the translator says they want to know whether or not, and I'm going to test you, this person represents America. The person that they quoted, see if you remember this, was a pastor in Gainesville, Florida, who wanted to burn a Quran. Do you remember this? Yeah. Do you remember his name? No. Imagine, I'm in Cambodia. I'm in the jungles of Cambodia, and that person named him by name because they had seen it on CNN. They had seen a flash of this. It was absorbed. It was in their system that this is what America does. So how parents, I'm saying this example because I think in a family, when you're watching the news, if you reject what certain people are saying, parents need to teach their children a different path, a different way of thinking about the other. And I really believe also, and I'm sorry you didn't ask this question about history connected to family, but I want to bring it home. There are so many ways where there are learning moments that we can teach American families a different way of thinking about who we are as Americans that are not the usual path that we see in commercial adventures out there. Thanksgiving is a perfect example. When we tell tales about what Thanksgiving and what happened we ought to be able to talk to our children about the history of this country and the native nations and tribes that were here before the Europeans came here. That shouldn't be a political issue. We should be able to talk to them with dignity. Giving dignity to others is a basic thing that we can teach a child. And how we think about that as Americans is really important at a time when we're ripping apart each other because of what your origin story is or how pure your blood is or where your genetic makeup came from. These are conversations that you're hearing in the paper and you're seeing on TV, and it's extraordinary. So I'd love to see our American families think more about who we are, how we talk about each other, how we bring dignity home for the other, and how we evoke compassion in the most basic ways.
And isn't that the promise of America?
It is.
As we close here, we
Yes.
have this beautifully diverse country that by 2040 will be majority minority, and we have an opportunity to demonstrate to the rest of the world what an innovative, compassionate, equitable society looks like.
And it matters. And I will say to you, I think what I think because I've traveled as much as I have. I came to this with a very different beginning on what I thought I was going to see around the world. This is a book that was written with hope and optimism. This isn't an all doom and gloom, we'll never win, and this is all horrible. But I told you that we are in a more fierce situation now than we were on 9/11 for so many of the reasons we've talked about in this last hour. But I know the power of a city, and I know the power of a mayor. And I'm not just saying this because you're sitting here with me. I would say this to anybody else. If you think your communities don't matter, they do. It isn't somebody else's problem. I know that you are bringing together all the mayors across America here in Louisville in 2020. I'd like to ask you whether or not fighting hate is on your agenda.
Fight the what?
If fighting hate is on your
fight,
agenda,
well,
yeah.
Yes, okay. And Lee's standing over here wanting us to, we'll wrap up here. So, yes, when you think about, so the past couple of years I've spent quite a bit of time outside of America also studying countering violent extremism, particularly in London, in Sweden. The roots of hate and the impact of hate all have the same thing. It's usually young guys that are disassociated with some type of loving structure that want to belong, and then they belong to fill in the blank. It can be an urban gang, it can be Al-Qaeda, it could be whatever, and then their tools are tools of radicalism and separation. So when you think about what I referred to earlier here today, 100 gun deaths in America a day. Now, many of them are gunned by suicide, but a lot of them are just urban gun violence that you see. And so this is has a lot of attention of mayors, obviously, because our goal is for people to live long, high-quality lives, and for people to feel like they live in a society or live in cities that we're all connected together. We're lifting each other up proactively. That's what we mean by compassion in our cities. So most recently, last year, the United States Conference of Mayors, that's our main learning organization as mayors, we created a Center for Inclusive and Compassionate Cities based on the work that we do here in our city and then other cities as well, knowing that it is a long journey. Okay, but the last thing we want to do as mayors or as cities or as family members is give up on these human values that you and I talked about. We are all born good people, right? I mean, how often do you see a baby pop out of the womb and crawl over to a mother and slap her in the face? They want hugs, they want kisses. So that's who we are. Somehow we unlearn that. Right? And our job as leaders and citizens, we're all leaders, is to reconnect us with our inner self. And I think that's the most powerful thing that a president can do, or a prime minister can do, that a minister can do, that you all can do as citizens as well. And not for people to roll their eyes when we start talking about it. Because the cost when that's not in our society, that's what we're seeing in our country right now. You know, we're hate speech. Some people will legitimize it. And I am so concerned about the impact that that has on our young people in our society right now when they see that on display in this hyper-localized media world that we have, or the internet where you can find anything, literally, right, that will fit what it is that you're wanting to learn about at that moment, that clearly has a lot of downside to it as well. So we're living in complex times. And I think it's really important that we continue to lead with a moral compass as we move through this. So it's a big issue for mayors, and we'll continue to work on that with the Conference of Mayors. So why don't you give us some closing remarks here on what our charge would be here as Louisvillians and citizens of the world.
Well, first I want to thank you all for coming. It really is such a pleasure to be back in Louisville. I love this place, and I, as you know, have been back several times because of the Muhammad Ali Center and the Humanitarian Awards. But there's something really special about a place that believes that compassion should be part of how they think about themselves. So my hat is off to all of you, and I think you can lead. I do think that what I have said to the mayor and what I really do believe is that you are an example for the rest of the country and the rest of the world when you see communities that are able to say that we are a city of compassion. We have values that are embedded in our educational system and the way we treat each other and what we want to do. Nothing is perfect. Nothing can ever be perfect, but pushing and striving towards that is really key. What I would say is, this is really scary stuff on one level. It just seems like it's impossible to find a place where we can find peace and that everything's going to be all right. And if you think about boiling the ocean, we will never get there. But what I say in my book is that, there are mega solutions, there are macro solutions, there are micro solutions, and there are nano solutions. And the nano solutions are each one of us and how we treat each other and what we do. And I sound like Pollyanna, but I'm not. I know that just changing the way you interpret and handle a situation with somebody who is different than you, who may love differently than you, or may look different than you, or pray differently than you, can really matter. And if we wait for governments to get their act together to do all of this at scale, we'll be waiting a really long time. So I want us to do more. And I am a partner in crime. I'm not from this place, but I am from this place. So thank you very much for having me.
Farah Pandith.
So I understand we have some time for some questions. We do have a microphone set up, and we do ask if you have a question that you come to the microphone. Then after we're finished with the Q&A session, if you all will stay in place for just a moment to give Ms. Pandith a chance to get over and set up for the book signing, and I'll have a couple of other little tidbits of information.
Well, if this was a press conference, I would have already said we're done. So, but we have a question, yes.
Hi. Oh, hi. Sorry. So talking about the nano and micro level, I was just thinking, if you think of these organizations that recruit and, sort of have a structure for members to, kind of rise in the ranks and have an ideology, what examples are you seeing around the world of the counter part of that, of citizens groups who are maybe doing interfaith work? Or can you just give us some examples of things to get inspired by?
So I talked about former extremists taking their content and making short films and producing those kinds of things is one answer in terms of content for former extremists. Another is a one-on-one with former extremists who are able to, if somebody's going online interested in fighting the Islamic State, what they end up getting to a place where they're having a chat with somebody who's a former extremist. They can take them, basically off-ramp them and do that. We've seen curriculums in schools where they're teaching an alternative way of thinking about their identity, so that they see diversity as our friend here. A monolithic Islam is not our friend. And so we didn't at all talk about that concept of everybody looking the same, breathing the same, only being one kind of Muslim. But there are efforts, bless you, around the world where people are pushing in that dimension. So using curriculums to be able to say you can express your religiosity in a lot of different ways works also. We have also seen, so we're talking about sort of the redirection on one level. We've talked about face-to-face, basically online. But we've also seen really great help with regard to how parents are understanding what's happening to their children. So the kinds of educational programs that we can develop for parents so that they can actually go in. We've seen hotlines that have been built so that kids who are having problems with their identity and are thinking that, something's up, that they can call and get this kind of support that they want. I could go on and on there, like whether you're talking about mental health aspects, curriculum aspects, history aspects, former extremist aspects. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of programs that exist out there 18 years after 9/11. The big problem is not coming up with a program. The big problem is the scale. So it's been like a whack-a-mole kind of situation. Something's happening over there, something's happening over there, but you cannot build resilience if it has to be all day, every day, as I said, 24/7, many touch points for a long period of time so we can begin to see that change. Behavioral change doesn't happen like this. It happens in that way.
Yes, ma'am. Okay.
Can you hear me?
I can.
How do you pronounce your last name?
So I Americanize it. I pronounce it Pandith.
Pandith?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Laquita Washington, and I am on Mayor Fisher advisory panel.
Excellent.
My council person is Barbara Sexton Smith. and I want to go over my notes, make sure I got things right. You grew up in a Boston suburb.
I did.
You worked for George W. Bush, George Bush, and Barack Obama.
I did.
You got a book called How We Win, and it costs $30.73.
Talk to the publisher.
You talked about extremism, nationalism, national security, and ideology. You've been to over 100 countries. You had 35 interviews. Took you 3 years to write the book, and you recorded it historically. You wrote the book so the history would be recorded. You said ideology, Al-Qaeda won't be defeated, but your goal is to reduce the appeal.
Yeah.
And then a question went in my mind, how do you reduce the appeal? But y'all got to it. You said family matters. It's how we raise our children, what books we read, what language we use, and children, children model after their parents. They learn what to accept and what to reject. I had an epiphany. We have a little bookstore down on Broadway. It's called Seeds to Oak.
Okay.
And what they do is they go into churches and mobilize churches to use the professionals in the pews. And then the light went on. I said, we got Dr. Cosby's got 3 churches. Southeast they working on their 9th conference. So if we went into churches and we mobilized and brought families in the church, mothers and fathers, the same way the Seeds to Oaks want to mobilize churches, why can't we use the churches to mobilize families? Bring the mothers and fathers in. You understand what I'm talking about?
I do.
Bring them in and let them learn what they say and the language they use, how it's affecting the children. Like you was talking about Al-Qaeda. Am I saying that right?
Yep.
Say it for me.
I pronounce it with an American accent, so I say Al-Qaeda.
Al-Qaeda.
Yes.
You say even when they hate each other, they still listen. That's what little kids are doing. We don't have gangs per se in Louisville, but we have little kids that's running around listening to each other. Those little kids have more influence on other kids than their parents do.
Yeah.
And this is what I'm suggesting, Mayor. We get into these churches, bring the families in and teach them what they say in front of their kids. The kids are learning from them. They're learning what to accept and what to reject. You feel me? Do y'all understand what I'm saying?
I feel you. All right, let's see what she has to say about that. Okay?
First of all, you take great notes. I'm
Yeah,
really
that was
impressed. That was
impressive.
really impressive. I want to say 2 things, if you would allow me. The first is your passion comes through really clearly, and I think your idea is a really important one. What happens in a place of faith is a very important access point for parents and for children. But you also know that not every young person and not every parent goes to a place of faith, whether that's a temple or a church or a mosque. So it has to happen inside a faith community and outside a faith community that we're teaching things. The second, you said something really important, and I just want to elaborate upon it. The most important voice for a young person growing up is not their parent, it's not their preacher, it's not anybody else, it's their peer, it's their friend. Peer-to-peer interventions. The woman who asked the question about what are the best programs that are out there, they are peer programs. They're networks of like-minded thinkers, young people themselves who have their own ideas that are pushing back. The kinds of programs that I built when I was in government were all about networks of smart young kids who had cool ideas about how to push back against hate. So what I would say to you is, as you think about the role that you are playing in your way, in your faith community, indeed, that is a really smart thing to do. But perhaps within Louisville in general, there are, I know, youth groups that do more to fight the bigger issue of fighting hate, perhaps talking about lexicon and history may be something that we could think about how to make that available to them if they're not doing it already.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
So my question's a little not all figured out exactly, but so you're speaking about the idea of these soft ways of approaching, our problems, and of course that's not something that we have embedded in our culture or our government in an institutional way. So if you're going to go and try and sell this stuff to Congress or wherever you try to get this started, number one, is it the people don't believe that it works, or they just don't believe that they can sell it? That's one question. And the other question is, does something like this go through the Department of Defense, or is it something completely radically different that needs to be really, and that'll take forever to sell to the American public? So anyway.
It was a well thought out question. Most importantly, did your T-shirt say Smith College on there?
We're going to talk to you after.
All right, excellent. I was like, I wanted to just make sure I saw that. Okay, so listen, on the soft power, it isn't that people don't believe that it works. Of course it works. Of course they understand that influence, making somebody attracted to an idea is something that works. Businesses use soft power. It's not just government that use soft power. So soft power does work. In the context of why we have failed to use soft power at the same pace and speed that we can. The Defense Department does use soft power. They are not only using hard power, and they understand the power of it. Mayor Fisher talked about what police will tell you. Like, even if you had all the police in the world out there, that isn't enough. Police forces across America and the world will tell you, we don't just want the kinetic side. We want engagement. We want to engage with communities. We want to talk to them. We want to open up the opportunities for communication, so we can listen and have a different kind of dialogue. What the problem has been in America post 9/11 is not convincing people that, in theory, soft power could make a difference. It's the latter point of what you said. How do you convince your constituency? Are you willing to take that risk to say, I'm going to put in X amount of money, even though it's really baby money, to do this when I can't see the return on my investment immediately? I can tell you, I went to such and such place, I deployed these many troops, this is what we got for that. Okay? You tell me, we did programs that were talking about engagement and building resilience, and it was really great. And how do you measure that? They don't know what to say to their constituencies. It's hard to sell. It seems completely crazy that we are even talking in this way, but that's why I gave you that number, 0.0138%, and that was just on the ISIS piece. We couldn't, by the end of the Obama administration, after a really long time of fighting to try to get money for the Department of Homeland Security, to be able to give grants to communities across America who were interested in building resilience. We only got, I know this sounds like a big number, but just put it in context. It took forever for us to get to the point that they said, we're going to give you $10 million in grants that you can give for the whole country, so that LA and all these cities, we fought tooth and nail to get the 10 million, and that doesn't exist anymore, by the way. It's been totally taken away. So you can spend $200 billion on the blah, 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 but you can't spend $30,000 on a grant. I want to just end with one example of a tiny little grant, because it goes to, I liked your question. You remember the Mothers Against Drunk, you guys know Mothers Against Drunk Driving? In the Bush administration, we knew that mothers could make a gigantic difference to how their kids were being raised and how they could really fortify their homes to make sure that Al-Qaeda's ideology couldn't get in. And we had this idea that, couldn't we think about the model, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, that started with grassroots mothers out there, doing what they did. So we started talking to mothers, the MAD groups all over America, to learn what they did and understand. And with $30,000, we partnered with an NGO in Vienna, and we said, could you build this kind of model for fighting extremism? using mothers, and we called it Sisters Against Violent Extremism, SAVE, SAVE. The SAVE network still exists today. It was started with a grant of $30,000, and the woman who runs it is Edith Schaffler, has made it into this incredible global brand called the Mother Schools, where she has curriculums in schools and gets mothers involved with $30,000. And it's the only all-female antibody in the world that is doing this in this way. No money, $30,000. So that's a good way to end. Yes.
Okay, so while Ms. Pandith makes her way over to the table for the book signing, I will ask you all, if you're lining up for the book signing, it's probably best to do that down in front here. And then I also wanted to mention the Lean Into Louisville programs are ongoing, and we have a couple coming up that I thought I would mention to you. On Wednesday night here at the main library, we will have an event that starts at 6 p.m. Chinese activist Li Maizi will lead a conversation on the Me Too movement in China and the rise of the feminist resistance. And then next Thursday, I think it is October 3rd, Carolyn Finney will lead a discussion on race, the environment, narrative, and place. So if you've enjoyed tonight's conversation, there's more information about all of the Lean Into Louisville programs online at their website at www.leanintoluisville.org. Thank you all for being here tonight. Let's give them one.